Hi there. Welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy, in our 8th season of hosting outstanding business communication professionals who share tips and strategies that will boost your business. And today it's an extreme pleasure and privilege to welcome Mike Sammond from the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. For the past 13 years, Mike Sammond has been the president and CEO of Gwinnett Business Radio X, a company that produces, distributes, and markets online radio shows and professional podcasts for businesses of all sizes in the Atlanta area. Mike Sammond is an award-winning radio and television sportscaster. It's impossible to mention all the places he has been a headliner. I can mention CNN Headline News, ESPN. He's been a sports highlight reporter and broadcaster, announcer for Olympic Broadcasting Services. And they have heard his voice and his expertise in faraway places like Vancouver, London, Rio, Tokyo, Beijing, Paris, Singapore. In fact, there are quite a few people who say that they have worked internationally, but they may have crossed the border once. Here's a guy who has been an international voice and presence for 13 years. Mike Sammond's play-by-play experience covers all sports: baseball, football, basketball, and hockey. He's announced games for Major League Baseball, Arena Football, International Hockey League, Southeastern Conference, and the list, as they say, could go on. Additionally, Mike has been a minority owner in professional minor league sports, such as hockey and arena football, while serving as a top executive in sports management. So I know you will be excited as I am to welcome Mike Sammond. Hello, Mike. How you do?
Hey there, Dr. Bill. How are you? You know, it would have probably been a lot easier just to say he's a jack of all trades, but a master of none.
That would have been inaccurate, sir, because you are a master of many. I've had the wonderful privilege of being with you when you first started Business Radio X. I remember very well a Gwinnett Business Radio X. I remember very well a reception that was held after your first year or so, and it was so impressive, the number of leaders that you had brought into that program, and many of them now have their own network of listeners and admirers. The first thought that comes to me today, Mike, is with all of this and looking at the fact that at the University of Georgia, where I once taught speech communication, your bio on LinkedIn shows that you were a broadcast journalism major. So the thought comes to my mind, and I'm sure to our viewers and listeners, exactly when did you start getting interested in journalism as a profession? I sometimes wonder if maybe in your baby crib there was a camera and a microphone. What really stirred your interest? Was it maybe watching some highly competent broadcasters or sensing the impact of the media? What really got you into this exciting and dramatic business?
It's funny, Dr. Bill, because you see people today and like my kids, you know, and they're in their 20s now. And, you know, when they were going to college, they didn't know what they wanted to do or had no idea. I didn't have a microphone or a TV camera with me in the crib, but I kind of knew at a very early age growing up outside of Boston, I was a big time hockey fan. And so back then I used to watch the Boston Bruins. And this was back when they had the great Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito and the Big Bad Bruins. And I played hockey every single day and I loved it. And for some reason, you would think a young kid in New England who loves hockey would want to grow up and be a professional hockey player. But for me, watching the telecast on TV, I wanted to be Fred Cusick and Johnny Pearson. Those were the announcers for the Boston Bruins back then. And I thought, how cool is it to have a job where you're paid to go see hockey or paid to go see sports. And so for whatever reason, I just decided as a young kid, now going back and knowing how much they get paid these days, I probably should have gone that route, but never had the big size or anything like that. And I was a decent hockey player, but I wasn't good enough. So from the age of 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I knew I wanted to be a sportscaster of some way. And when I was a sophomore in high school, my dad took a job in Atlanta. So we moved down south to the Atlanta metropolitan area, Alpharetta. I'm a graduate of Milton High School. And it turns out, I didn't know at the time, but I was very fortunate that to move down here because UGA, and I'm sure you know this, had one of the top journalism schools in the country. Back in the day, back in the late 80s, if you wanted to be a broadcaster, you would go to Syracuse was the number one school. That's where Bob Costas and all the great announcers came from. But the other top schools were Missouri and the Henry Grady School of Journalism at UGA. So I was very fortunate to move to this area with Georgia right down the road. And so I went there, got my broadcast degree. As soon as I started college there, I worked at the campus radio stations and I did as much as I could. Got to call a lot of sports at the campus radio station. That turned into a job with a commercial radio station in Athens. And I've been in sports broadcasting in some form or fashion ever since.
Every time I host someone, I find some common ties that I didn't know about. Mike, when I was on the speech communication faculty at the University of Georgia, my first year there, they launched WUOG, the campus radio station. So I listened to it for a year. And after a year, I went to the station manager who was a student. And I said to him, you call this a campus radio station, but you're leaving out a significant factor. It's all students who are doing the broadcasting. I think they're doing a fine job. But what about having a faculty program? And so they agreed. And for a couple of years, I started hosting a weekly 1-hour interview show. And I interviewed students, I interviewed faculty members, I interviewed some of the star football players of the time. The name of the program was Dialogue because that's what I wanted. It was a wonderful experience. And in those days, maybe not later on for your era, but in those days to continue in broadcasting, we had to get a broadcasting license. I remember having to study for that and go to downtown Atlanta and take a written test, and I had no idea what some of the terminology was, but I had to learn. Did you have any entrance qualifications like that into radio?
We didn't need any kind of a license or anything like that to be a broadcaster back then. Yes, our days at WUOG. So you're familiar with walking up all the stairs to the top of Memorial Hall.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I was fortunate as a freshman, I came in and again, it was a student run station. So what a great benefit for the students that want to be broadcast majors. And I started in news. I got to work sports. My senior year, I was the station manager of the campus radio station. And my only goal was not to screw it up and to make sure we stayed on the air. I probably wasn't the best general manager, but I got so much great experience that when I left UGA, I was able to get a job right out of school as a sports director at a TV station because of the experience I had, the hands-on experience. So, my advice to anybody that wants to get into the field of broadcasting is take any job, whether it's news or sports, it doesn't matter. You want to get your foot in the door and just get on air as much as you can. And it's okay if you're not good. You're not supposed to be good when you start. We were on a campus radio station. I also worked on some AM radio stations. So a lot of people probably didn't hear a lot of the things I did, which is probably a good thing. But the more reps you can get, the better. So you always want to do as much as possible. And it was a great experience. At my 4 years at UGA were a lot of fun, and it laid the groundwork for the rest of my career.
It reminds me of a subsequent radio show that I was privileged to host. I moved to professionally to a small town in Kansas, McPherson, Kansas. And they had a very small population. They had one radio station. So after I'd been there a couple of months, I decided there wasn't much else to do on weekends, and I loved radio. So I went to a friend who took me to the station manager, and the station manager interviewed me, and we talked a little about my radio experience, and he wanted to find out, of course, how I would sound on the air. So this was maybe on a Wednesday, and I can still remember him saying at station KNEX, okay, you'll start Saturday morning. Be here at 5:30. And like many of us who start in the media, I ran the AM and FM station for 12 hours on Saturdays. And that was in the days of reel-to-reel tape. One of the fun things about it is thinking back to some of the early mistakes we made. Not you, of course, but I can remember some that I made. But like in any profession, we learn from our mistakes, don't we?
You're going to make mistakes. We're human, and that's fine. I make mistakes to this day, but you're never going to be perfect. If you shoot for perfection, you're going to fail. But those are the fun days. I did, when I was at UGA, we learned how to do reel-to-reel, cutting the actual tape with a razor blade.
Yes.
At UOG, we played records. When I was working at WRFC, the commercial radio station in Athens, while I was a student, I was doing the obituaries every day. We would look at the Athens newspaper, and I would talk about Dr. Joe Smith passed away at the age of 86. His memorial service will be tomorrow night. And you do whatever it takes to get in there. You're going to make mistakes. But again, that lays the whole foundation for everything you do. And I will tell you too, you mentioned how I'm with Business Radio X now, and I started 13 years ago. When you're in the business, you're going to move around a lot, and you're going to have a lot of roles. And I can't believe I've been doing this for 13 years. I've never been anywhere for 13 years. But it's been a lot of fun. You meet a lot of great people. I would also say that when you be kind to everybody you work with, treat everybody with respect. You never know, the people you pass on your way up are going to be the same people you pass on the way down, because there are going to be peaks and valleys. I've learned that. And some people that I've worked with that are now at network level broadcasting stations are people that, you didn't maybe see it with them back then, but they had the drive and desire. And you never know where these people will go. And one day they may help you move along. But it's funny, Dr. Bill, because sometimes, even though I've done work at CNN Headline News and had it appear, as you say, on ESPN and things like that, there's something about small town radio that I think is kind of fun and cool. And I hope that never goes away. I know today with digital technology and podcasting, I'm in the business, there's talk that FM and AM radio may not survive, but I hope some way, somehow, there's always going to be a place for small town radio in our lives.
I remember I watched several interviews that are available easily on YouTube featuring Paul Harvey. And in one of his final speeches professionally before his death, he said to a group that there's just nothing like radio. And of course, it's been called the theater of the mind. And I'll give you a contrast here, since you're in sports broadcasting. There was a time in my younger days, and I did have younger days. There was a time in my younger days when the only football games broadcasted were the bowl games. That's all. No other seasonal games were broadcasted because television knew it was very cumbersome. And one of the things that I noticed so early was that you might hear a game on radio. And let's say, for example, a bowl game, you might hear it on the radio. And then if you had a chance to see it replayed on television, you're thinking, was that the same game? Because as you know, the the announcer, the broadcaster, the sportscaster paints a picture of what's happening. And that's so exciting. I think the most exciting football game I ever heard was that famous LSU Ole Miss game when Billy Cannon made his 89-yard run. I heard that on radio. I've seen it since on television. It's replayable on YouTube. And yet, replaying it, even if I'd seen it live on television, I'm not sure I would have had the same thrill as the drama that came across on radio.
There's a lot of great announcers, the Bob Costases of the world who prefer radio over television because, as you say, you do paint the picture. In TV, of course, it's visual. You don't have to describe as much. It's a completely different medium. But if you can do radio, you can do TV. If you could do TV, I don't know if you can necessarily do radio because you have to be very descriptive. But it's as I said earlier, it's a lot of fun. And I will say this as well, whether for those that want to get into the broadcast business as well, a lot of people say you got to have the great voice. Now, we're not all going to have the Dr. Bill voice of God that you have, but you don't have to have the great voice. Just do your homework and know your stuff. I've called a lot of games, and I will prepare for days and days and days for a 2-hour broadcast. And 90% of the stuff that you prepare, you're never going to use on air. But if you're prepared, it shows. Because I've been in the business, when I'm listening to sports talk radio here in Atlanta, I can tell who's prepared and who's kind of winging it, if you will. And quite honestly, I got out of sports radio 6-7 years ago because I kind of lost that desire to spend every waking moment watching every sports cast. I wanted to have a life, and my priorities had changed as I got older. And I felt like I was just taking up the time when I was working at sports radio in Atlanta, that someone young and up and coming really deserved the spot more than me. So I stepped aside because really you have to do your homework. You have to eat, sleep, drink, eat sports if that's what you want to do. So there's a major commitment there.
Yes, it's not an ad lib business.
No, you you can't fake it. I mean, if you don't do the homework and you don't know what you're talking about, people can see right through that. And like I said, I can tell who's done their homework because of having been in the business when I'm watching a TV show, broadcast, or listening to a radio show.
Mike, I want to feature next what Gwinnett Business Radio X is all about. We'll talk about that in just a few seconds. All right, Mike, I know, as we said in the introduction, it was 13 years ago that you started, along with your colleagues, Gwinnett Business Radio X. It seems to me I read in the last day or two that there are 130 million people a day listening to podcasts. I'm not sure if that's accurate, but I know it's vastly popular. Tell us what goes on with Gwinnett Business Radio X.
The number I've heard, by the way, for this year, that this is the first year where 100 million people are listening to a podcast each week. I don't know if it's every day. It could be every day. The average podcast listener listens to 7 podcasts a week. The founders of the company, Business Radio X, started this about 20 years ago, before podcasting was even a thing. And they tried to figure out a way to help the small business owner, to how to use this platform to help the small business owner. And they came up with a way to give a voice to small business. Small business is the backbone of every community. And so we take a lot of pride in being the voice of business in the communities that we serve. So I have the station here in Gwinnett County. We have studios throughout Atlanta, and we have several others across the country. And we give that business leader a chance to come on and talk about the great work they're doing. at no cost. We want to hear their story. We want to help get the word out. We want to level the playing field for those small business owners. But we also offer an opportunity for those business owners to have their own podcast, which checks a lot of boxes. You're creating content. You're becoming an authority in your field. You're establishing relationships in the studio with the people that you meet. In our 13 years of doing shows here in Gwinnett, we've had over 3,500 business leaders, including people like yourself, Dr. Bill, come on our shows and talk about the great work they're doing in the community. And you meet everybody and anybody. So it's been very rewardful for me. It's been a lot of fun. I get to talk for a living. I've met so many wonderful people, yourself included. So it's something that we are giving back to the community. We're giving a voice to small business, but we're making a little money as well by having businesses of all sizes. We have banks, we have health coaches, we have financial planners, we have attorneys that have their own shows, and they come to our studio and we produce their shows for them, and that's how we make our living here. So it's been a lot of fun. It has to be for me to be having done this for 13 years now.
One of the things I'm curious about is what is the major time and place that people listen to podcasts? Now, I will give my own experience with it. I travel some still, and I've got a daughter in Columbia, South Carolina, and one in Savannah, and I travel some on business still. When I traveled for many years, I would play some of the popular music that I liked, and through Spotify, I still will do that occasionally. I did find out, though, that after a while, I'd heard it all several times. So I started listening to podcasts. And then for me, the 5.5-hour drive to Savannah becomes much more fascinating and, of course, informative, because I am listening. And I remember way back when we first got, I guess it was called books on tape at the time, and I would be listening to a book driving along alone. I remember when I'd go to a rest stop, I would get back to the car quickly. I wanted to hear it. In addition, what do you know is the listening place and time and habit that most people have who listen to podcasts, Mike?
I think you kind of nailed it right there. A lot of people, they're multitasking. People are on the treadmill, they're exercising, they're taking a walk, and they're listening that way. Obviously, more people listen in cars than they do, sitting in an office on their computer. The iPhone has changed everything, and that's you ask, why is podcasting become so popular? If it was one word, it would be smartphone. iPhones and that sort of thing have changed everything. People are multitasking. They're on the go. And the great thing about a podcast, one of the questions I get from a lot of our clients is, how long should my show be? Can I do an hour? Can I do 2 hours? You could, but you probably after 30 minutes, you're going to lose half your audience. The podcasts they're in bite-sized samples that people love. The great thing about a podcast too, there's millions of them out there. So if you are into anything, if your thing is you love cats and dogs playing checkers, I don't know, just something crazy, there's probably a podcast out there about animals playing checkers. I don't know, but there's anything you love. So that there's those niches out there that whatever it is that you love, there's going to be a show that's going to be for you. And once you find that show, it's amazing. And my kids are the same way as you now. They're listening to Spotify and so forth. They're not listening to FM and AM radio. They're using the Bluetooth on their phone to go into the car speaker. And so they're listening to their shows and their music that way. So the landscape is changing, but podcasting, as you say, it's reaching thresholds, 100 million listeners now every week. Just in the United States alone, obviously worldwide, and the U.S. isn't even the most popular country when it comes to podcasting. We're up there, but there are other countries where it's even more popular. But podcasting continues to grow, and it's going to be growing for the foreseeable future.
Well, getting to your point about the potential length of a podcast, I prefer when I'm traveling to a podcast that I'm going to listen to be at least 30 minutes. If one's 7 minutes, I don't want to have to stop and change to something else. 30 minutes is reasonable, and I believe, as you say, that's also a probably a good standard for how long you will hold a listener on a topic. And
it is the sweet spot. 30 minutes is the sweet spot because the average commute for most people is 30 minutes.
And that's why we today have a 30-minute limit. One quick question before we sign off. Most of us in any profession have role models, have idols, have those that we admire and learn from. Would there be, you mentioned some at the start, but tell us again, who would be the top 2 or 3 broadcasters that have influenced you the most?
I've always gravitated towards the ones that are just well prepared and share the story, and it's not about them, and they don't have any gimmicks. Close to home, a guy like a Pete Van Wieren, longtime announcer for the Atlanta Braves. He was the PR guy for the Braves, so he knew everything. He knew all the numbers. The Bob Costas, the Al Michaels, the guys that just give a great job of giving the story and throwing in some facts and things like that. To me, a good broadcaster is one that you don't even really notice they're there, like an umpire or a referee in a football game. If they're doing their job, you don't even kind of realize they're there, but they make you feel at home. They almost feel like they're talking to you, that they're your friend. I got nothing against the Chris Bermans of the world with the, back, home run, but I'm not into the gimmickies, the loud shouting ones, the ones that are more subdued a little bit and just let the sport share and do a good job too. There are a lot of announcers that just don't do the basics. When you're doing radio, not so much TV, but radio, which is, we talked about, you and I, it's really our first love. Give the basics. What's the score of the game? Where is the ball on the field right now? Who's in the game? There are people that will do a radio, and you might listen to a baseball game for 10 minutes, and you have no idea what the score is. A secret that a lot of baseball broadcasters will do, and well, actually in any sport, they'll have an egg timer with them, and they'll turn the egg timer over every time. And when that egg timer runs out, make sure they've given the score of the game, just the basics. Where are we in the game? It's 14-7. We're in the third quarter, or it's 12-10, and it's in the 7th inning. So the broadcaster that just gives the basics and guides me along and tells me what's happening, and isn't overbearing. So the Bob Costas, the Al Michaels, the Ernie Johnsons of the world, just consummate professionals that don't rely on gimmicks. Those are the people I gravitate towards, and the ones I look up to, and the ones that I try to emulate when I'm doing my games.
Yes, and we, being Georgians, certainly I think would want to include Larry Munson, who was a personality as well as a sportscaster, and added so much to University of Georgia football and tradition. Well, Mike, there's that saying, the old clock on the wall. I see it's time for us to sort of wind it up. I want to thank you, and I know our listeners and our viewers will want to thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. So I know there are those who will want to contact you, to follow up with you. So please give us your contact information.
I'll keep it very simple. Mike@businessradiox.com. And if you're a small business person out there and would like to get the word out about the great work you're doing in the community, shoot me an email and we'll get you on a show, and we'll spend 15 minutes talking about the great work that you're doing.
Mike is the guy. Mike is the guy who has helped so many people find the magic and the attractiveness, the magnetic attractiveness of podcasting. Do get in touch with Mike. And now that Mike has given his contact information, I'm happy to give mine. My YouTube channel, Bill Lampton, Ph.D. I've been posting videos on YouTube since 2007. Please don't look at any of those. In recent years, it hasn't been just my communication strategies and tips that I've given, but I've featured other people. In fact, as I mentioned at the outset, this is the 8th season for the Biz Communication Show, when I have wonderful guests like Mike. And then my website, since my tagline is Biz Communication Guy, logically, my website is bizcommunicationguy.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast. And when you go to that YouTube channel I mentioned, I hope you will subscribe to the YouTube channel. I welcome phone calls, no obligation, no initial cost, to hear about your communication problems and challenges, and see how I or someone I know can assist you with those. The co-producer of the Biz Communication Show, I give credit to Mike Stewart. In 1997, I met Mike Stewart through the National Speakers Association, Georgia, and Mike has been a wonderful mentor both in technology and marketing ever since. So I encourage you to go to his website, localinternetpresence.com. Mike, as we wind it up and think of what we've covered, what about giving us a takeaway thought, 30 seconds or a minute that you would like to leave with us, please?
Well, I'm thinking that anybody might be listening to this may be somebody that's interested in getting into the broadcasting business. It's a very rewarding business. It's a lot of fun if you have the passion for it. I would say do whatever it takes to get your foot in the door, no matter where it is. And I'll give a real quick story. I'm pretty good at dropping names. I haven't dropped any in this show, but one of my people that I worked with in my earlier days when I first started in television was Reese Davis. Now, if you watch ESPN now and you watch college football game day, everybody knows who Reese is. When Reese started at the TV station where we were in Columbus, Georgia, he came on working in news. He covered the city council meetings. He covered the school board meetings. It's not what he signed up for or what he wanted to do, but he got his foot in the door. He started doing the covering those events. And then on the weekends, when we would need some help with college football or Friday night with high school football, he would help us out. Eventually, a couple of years later, I would move on and go on to do some baseball broadcasting in North Carolina. That opened up a spot in our sports department, and Reese was able to move in, eventually worked his way up to sports director, and the rest, as they say, is history. So whatever it takes to get in the doors, sweeping floors, cleaning the bathroom, whatever it is to get into a door, working at a radio station, a TV station, you might have to cover news, and even though you want to be sports, when I started out, I wanted to take any job I could get just to get in the door. It leads to great things. And so that would be my advice. Do whatever it takes early on. It may not be your ultimate goal, but eventually you'll get there.
That certainly destroys the myth that probably many television and radio fans have, is that guy or that lady at the top has always been there. Not the case. And there are many qualified people who don't get there. But I remember as a kid, the first time to that age group, tape recorders were available, Mike. And the magic of hearing our voices on tape recorders, and you'd take a tape recorder to a party and everybody would and you'd listen, and that was probably maybe my first introduction to what some type of media could do to attract, excite, entertain, educate, and I still love it. And that's why I host this show, and I have the incredible privilege of hosting experts like you. Thank you again so much for being with us today.
Well, Dr. Bill, congratulations to you for doing something that a lot of people can't do, and that is to force me and to get me to talk about myself, because it's not something I prefer to do or like to do, but because of my respect for you, you've always been so gracious, so kind with your time and your talent, and I appreciate you very much that I was willing to do this, because I don't like to talk about myself, but it has been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you so very much. And the feelings of respect and admiration that you mentioned, they're so mutual. Thanks to those of you who joined us on the video portion and on the podcast. Invite you to be with us again next week for another version of the Biz Communication Show, when we bring you tips and strategies that will boost your business.